everybody, it's Frankie-Lou. I'm coming to you today from one of the greenhouses in the Grow Together homestead, and I wanted to talk to you today about squash. I get excited about squash. Those of you who subscribe know I get excited about pretty much everything when it comes to this garden, but squash I really enjoy. Now, I live in zone 3, and I often have frost as late as mid-June and as early as late August, early September. So with that in mind, I grow a lot of my squash, particularly winter squash, in the greenhouse because there I can protect it. It means I get great growth at the start, but it also means that I can have some issues because squash need to have, they tend to get powdery mildew. A lot of you have seen that probably before, which is definitely made worse by a lack of ventilation. So in my greenhouse, I make sure that I have a ton of ventilation. My windows on either side here, my upper windows are almost always open, and I have vents all the way around the top there to allow for a lot of ventilation. It also allows the pollinators to get in. Another thing I want to do that I found has really made a difference for keeping my plants from getting powdery mildew is I grow my squash vertically. It lifts it off the ground, gets it less crowded, gives me more room in a greenhouse because trust me, you never have enough room in a greenhouse. I always want to grow more and more and more, and I can do that if I grow my squash vertically. It also, I find that the pollinators have an easier time finding the flowers if it's not all just spread out on the ground covered in leaves. The pollen, as the squash grows up vertically, the flowers are a lot more exposed, and as bees can come in here as much as they like, I generally don't have to pollinate, well, my plants at all. So I'm going to show you a couple of samples here of vertically growing. You'll also notice that I have a lot of other plants growing with my squash. In particular, I grow a lot of beans, and I grow a lot of companion plants that are going to bring pollinators into the greenhouse, okay? Because there are certain plants that all of the pollinators absolutely love, and I want to bring them in. Another thing that I grow with my squash, and I know we've talked about this before, is radishes, because the radish flower does a really great job of repelling the squash beetles. Okay, so I'm going to take you and show you a couple of individual examples here of growing squash vertically, and another couple of tips on how to get that squash maintaining healthily in this greenhouse. Okay, here we have an example of a winter squash that I'm growing in here with some companion plants. This is a red curry squash, and as you can see, the flowers are really well exposed. Okay, so that's great because it means that the pollinators are going to have a much easier time finding it. Now I do have it tied a little here, but honestly, those ties are in place basically just to help the plant get used to using its own little tendrils here. And they'll continue to go up the stake, and they'll go around on the rafters the way that the companion plant of the beans have done here. I've got a nice purple bean that's growing alongside it. That's feeding the plant with nitrogen into the soil, and it's also, now this plant is going to go up and it'll start hanging its fruit down over the rafters where it'll be really easy to support it. Okay, so I find that I can get some of these summer squash, well, winter squash can grow all the way over to the other side. Okay, and another great one that I've got here is the Trombonacini squash. This is one of Angus's favorite because these little guys here are going to become crazy long, almost like a zucchini, but much tastier. And they'll get long. Like we've had ones that are 4 feet long and still taste tender. As you can see, it's companion planting with more beans. I plant beans around the base of every single squash plant. Another companion plant you'll see a lot of here is the radish that we talked about. I've got about 6 other plants along this side, which if you were to plant in a traditional bed, that would be pretty tight. But as I'm making the plant grow up, I'm going to have plenty of room, and I got room for nasturtiums and herbs and other plants like borage, which are an awesome companion plant for pretty much anything in your garden because it's going to bring the bees to it. Okay, so as you can see, I'm getting a lot of fruiting. Like if you look here on my Trombonacini, growing vertically has really done a good job for it. Okay, now one thing people ask me all the time is if I prune my plants. And basically what I do with that when it comes to squash is I read the room. Okay, right now these plants don't have any trace of powdery mildew on them at all. Okay, and I'm getting good fruiting, and so I can leave it as it is. But if I start to notice some powdery mildew, I will remove some of those leaves just to create better airflow. Okay, it looks like I'm going to get a really good squash crop this year if things go well. One thing that I will suggest, if you are going to grow vertically, when you grow squash on the ground, some of the tendrils will root out and draw more nutrients from the soil. So I make sure that squash are extremely heavy feeders. So I've got lots of fertilizer here. I fertilize with Dirty Duck water tea. I know that sounds disgusting, but it's an amazing fertilizer that I use because that squash plant isn't going to be drawing any nutrients from the soil apart from the one base, because you're growing vertically. So I really highly recommend that if you are going to grow vertically, that you do fertilize your plants with an organic fertilizer frequently, because they will only be able to feed from that one nutrient source. Okay, another thing is to make sure that you have really strong supports. I know these are flimsy little poles that I'm using now, but they are going to be attached onto the rafters of this thing, which is withstood hurricane winds. So I think you can withstand my red curry squash hanging down. So yeah, you want to make sure that you've got lots of supports. I have all sorts of little things hanging down for the tendrils to catch on to and move over, and I'll show you guys all how it looks in about a month's time. It's like a Christmas tree in here with all the fruits hanging down. So if you haven't started growing your squash vertically, one of the reasons I'm doing this video right now is it's probably not too late to do so, because your squash is probably just starting to take off if you live in zone 3 like me. If you don't live in zone 3, then you're probably enjoying your squash already. But yeah, give it a try. You might find that you get a better yield. I know I sure did once I started, and I was able to plant more intensively, which is something that I want to do because I want to make the most of my land. So as always, ask any questions that you like in the comments. I'd be happy to answer them. Please let us know if there's anything that you want Angus and I to be talking about in a future episode, and we'll do our best to do that for you. And as always, I hope you take this chance to grow together today. Have a good one.